made it thus far. Congratulations. We're in the last chapter of Book 1 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Chapter 13. In this video, I'd like to walk through Chapter 13 to provide students with an introduction or first reading as they work through the study of classical ethics. As I said, this is the last chapter of Book 1. I always tell my students that the most difficult thing about the study of ethics is the first book can be pretty boring because Aristotle deals with all of the background issues and sort of prepares the foundation for the study of ethics, and then as we get halfway through Book 2 we actually get to the study of virtue, and then the rest of the Nicomachean Ethics is a fascinating study of the virtues and vices one by one, which is, as I always tell people, probably the most useful and valuable study that you'll ever have in any of your school experience. So, like I said, congratulations for making it this far. If you've worked through chapters 1 through 12, I hope to help you finish up chapter 13 and wrap up Book 1. So let's get started. In chapter 13, Aristotle continues and says, "Since, however, felicity is a certain energy of the soul, according to perfect virtue, we must direct our attention to virtue. For perhaps we shall thus also speculate better concerning felicity." Since felicity has to do with virtue, our knowledge of virtue will help us with our pursuit of felicity. But it seems that he who is skilled in the administration of public affairs labors especially about this, for he wishes to make the citizens worthy persons and obedient to the laws. And as an example of these, we have the legislators of the Cretans and Lacedaemonians, and any others there may have been of this kind. If, however, the speculation itself is of the political science, it is evident that the enquiry will be conformable to our intention from the beginning. But our discussion must be concerning virtue, namely human virtue, for we investigate human good and human felicity, and we call human virtue not the virtue of the body, but of the soul. And we say that felicity is the energy of the soul. If, however, this be the case, it is evident that he who is skilled in the administration of public affairs ought to know whatever pertains to the soul, just as he who intends to cure the eyes ought to have a knowledge of the whole body, and this in a greater degree by how much more honorable and excellent the political science is than the medicinal science. Of physicians likewise, the more elegant are busily employed about the knowledge of the body. He therefore who is skilled in the administration of public affairs must direct his attention to the soul. But he must direct his attention to it for the sake of these things, and so far as is sufficient to the objects of inquiry. For to consider the soul still more accurately is perhaps more laborious and difficult than the present discussion requires. Just so you know, Aristotle wrote a separate treatise on the soul. We have also said some things sufficiently concerning it in our popular writings, and those must be consulted, such as that one part of the soul is irrational, but another part of the soul rational. But whether these parts are separated in the same manner as the parts of the body, and everything which is partible, or they are two parts in definition alone, and are naturally inseparable, as in the periphery of a circle and the convex and the concave, is of no consequence in this present discussion. Of the irrational part, however, one part resembles the common and vegetative power. I mean the power which is the cause of nutrition and increase or growth. For such a power as this may be admitted to exist in everything that is nourished, in embryos, and also in perfect animals, since it is more reasonable that this power should exist in them than any other. The virtue, therefore, of this power appears to be common and not human. For this part seems especially to energize in sleep. But a good and a bad man can in the smallest degree be distinguished in sleep. Whence it is said that the happy differ in no respect from the miserable during half of their life, that is, while they're sleeping. But this happens reasonably, for sleep is an activity both of the worthy and the depraved soul. Except so far as certain motions gradually arrive at the soul, and on this account the phantasms of worthy men are better than those of worthless men. But of these things enough. The nutritive part therefore must be omitted, since it is naturally destitute of human virtue. There appears, however, to be another certain irrational nature of the soul, which nevertheless participates in a certain respect of reason. For we praise the reason of the continent, or self-controlled man, and also of the incontinent man, and that part of the soul which possesses reason. For it rightly excites to the most excellent deeds. There appears, however, to be in them, that is, both in the continent and incontinent man, something else naturally contrary to reason, which wars against and resists reason. For indeed, as the paralyzed parts of the body, if we wish to move them to the right hand, are on the contrary moved to the left, thus also it is in the soul. For the impulses of the incontinent are in a direction contrary to the dictates of reason. In bodies, however, we see that which is moved contrary to the intention of the will. But in the soul, we do not see that which is moved contrary to reason. Though perhaps we ought nevertheless to think that in the soul also there is something opposite to reason, which is adverse and proceeds in a direction contrary to it. But it is of no consequence in what manner it is different from reason. This part, however, appears, as we have said, to participate of reason. It is obedient, therefore, to the reason of the continent man, and perhaps it is still more obedient to the reason of the temperate and brave man. For all things are in concord with his reason. It appears, therefore, that the irrational part is twofold. For the vegetable part in no respect participates of reason, but the part which desires, or in short, the orectic part, participates in a certain respect of reason, so far as they are attentive and obedient to it. In this way, therefore, we say that a man has a regard for, or pays attention to his father and his friends, and not after the same manner as he has regard for the mathematical sciences. But that the irrational part is in a certain respect obedient to reason, admonition, and all reproof and exhortation indicate. If, however, it be requisite to say that this part also possesses reason, that which possesses reason will be twofold, the one indeed properly and in itself, but the other resembling a child attentive to a father. Virtue likewise is distributed according to this difference. For we say that of the virtues, some are dianoetic, or belong to the power which reasons scientifically, but others ethical. And we denominate indeed wisdom, intelligence, and prudence to be dianoetic virtues, but liberality and temperance ethical virtues. For when we speak concerning the manners of man, we do not say that he is wise or intelligent, but that he is mild or temperate. We likewise praise a wise man according to habit, but we call the laudable habits virtues. This is the end of chapter 13 and the end of book 1 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. A few notes. Note in the beginning of the chapter just how highly Aristotle thinks of a man who devotes himself to the political science or the administration of public affairs, as he says. Notice also that he says the purpose of that man's work is to seek the welfare of the citizens by leading them to be good and by establishing laws and by enforcing those laws to actually resist evil among them and help them to be good, that they may be happy. That's the true work of true political science. That's pretty impressive. He says that political science is more excellent than medicinal science because whereas the physician attends to the care and health of the body, the physical body, the man who gives himself to public affairs, to the political man, he actually attends to the good of the soul, and not just the soul of an individual, but the soul of every individual in a state. That's a pretty high bar when we see what Aristotle thinks about a man who devotes himself to the work of politics. He's not just a caretaker of a body, but he's a caretaker of all of the souls of the people over whom he governs. That's the true nature of political power and the responsibility of government. So that's the first thing worth noting is Aristotle's view of government, how important that is, and what true politicians ought to be. They ought to be those who don't allow, like modern people we call demagogues, are leaders of the people who just sort of do whatever the public wants. They just act for votes. They'll do whatever people want as long as they get their votes, and they follow the vulgar crowd, because in a democracy the vulgar crowd has the most votes. We find that those people are actually false politicians. The only way that a person could be a true politician would be to seek to lead all people in a state to true human good, which is virtue and happiness. And this study of Aristotle's ethics would be the beginning of the study necessary for true political science. So that's a great look into Aristotle's view of the nobility of political science and the work of politics. And maybe we should all give more attention to considering how we as Christians may contribute to the good of our cities and states and even our country through participation in true politics, which is a whole separate topic, obviously. But that's one note worth making here. And then it's also helpful for us just to get a little taste of Aristotle's teaching on the soul. He teaches that there are two parts of the soul, one related to reason, one not related to reason. That which is not related to reason, he says, divides into two parts, the vegetable part and the orectic part. The vegetable part has to do with nutrition and growth, physical nutrition and growth, and then the orectic part has to do with desire or appetite. And then the rational part of the soul, he says, divides into two parts which relate to the two different classes of virtue, the dianoetic and the ethical. So those are some helpful things to look into. And as I said, Aristotle has a whole book on the soul, which is a separate study, which you may want to get into if you find all of this interesting. But he's doing this, he's talking about the nature and the parts of the soul, because felicity is the energy of the soul according to virtue. And in order to understand that, we need to understand at least something about the soul, how it exists, what its nature is, and so on. So he provides us with a little overview of the classical understanding of the soul, and that prepares us for our study of virtue in Book 2, which, as we see, is going to be divided into two kinds of virtue, dianoetic and ethical, and we need to understand that before we can understand the virtues. So that's it for Book 1. If you've followed along through these studies, congratulations. I know it's a lot of work. There's a lot of material in these lessons that's new and unfamiliar, and that's always uncomfortable and requires a lot of discipline and study. I hope these videos are helpful to help you grind through that first reading, which is really the most important part, where you just get a sense of what's contained in each chapter, what needs to be studied. I hope my videos give you a little bit of help understanding what's in these chapters, and then when you sit down to study them for mastery, you're able to do so more efficiently. That's my goal in these videos. So that's it for Book 1. When you wrap up and feel comfortable, get your assessment submitted and approved, we'll move on to Book 2 in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. God bless your studies.